lesson, let's talk about dispute resolution. So what happens if after the sale, you as the buyer or the seller has issues? So first let's look at buyer issues. So you have a buyer that does not pay, takes a long time to pay, makes claims after the sale the item was damaged, it's the wrong item, or other issues. So let's deal with each one individually. First, buyer not paying. If the buyer does not pay, unfortunately, there's not a whole lot you can do. You can file a claim with eBay and PayPal, who will make an attempt to collect money from the buyer. This is not always possible. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Your best action is to relist the item, or eBay now has what's called a second chance offer that lets you offer the item to someone else other than the winner of the auction because the winner backed out, won't pay, etc. You can also apply for a final value fee refund if you choose, but if you use a second chance offer and sell the item, you'll only be charged a fee based on the new sale price, not necessarily what it sold for the first time. Always communicate with buyers. I always put in my listings how long I expect it to take for payment, and it depends on the listing. For time-sensitive items, it might be 1 or 2 hours. Typically, I say within 1 business day. So if after 1 business day I have no payment, I might send a reminder. After 3 to 5 business days, I'm looking at second chance offers. If a buyer makes a claim about the item, I got the wrong item, the item doesn't work, etc. This is where listing really makes a difference. As we talked about in the last lesson, most of these disputes can be mitigated before they even happen if your item description is clear and accurate. If a buyer says, I didn't know about the scratch on the back of the phone, but your listing clearly depicts pictures and a description of that scratch, the buyer really doesn't have a leg to stand on. But if your description says, hey, mint condition, and your pictures don't accurately depict the quality of the item, maybe the buyer now has a claim against you. So let's next talk about seller issues. So now let's flip the coin. Now you're the buyer. So item takes a long time to arrive or never arrives at all. Again, as the seller, this is why it's important to understand that the handling time that you list plus the shipping method you offer drives the estimated shipping date. Make sure those are accurate. I've hammered on this several times throughout the course, but let's flip the side for a minute and say you're the buyer and you have a seller. You bought an item. It was supposed to arrive Friday. It's now Tuesday and it's not there. The first thing you should do is communicate with the seller. Say, hey, what's up? Look if there's tracking information in my eBay. If the seller uses the shipping options in my eBay to print labels, tracking information is automatically updated. So check in there and see if there's a problem. Perhaps the problem isn't with the seller, it's with the shipping company, UPS, the Postal Service, FedEx, whatever. Maybe they've delayed it. Maybe you live in a remote location. Maybe there was a snowstorm. Maybe there was a tornado. Maybe something happened on the shipping company's end that's delayed your package. Ask the seller. If there's no information there, you can't glean anything from it, ask the seller, hey, what's going on? So after 30 days, you don't have an item. Now it's time to file a claim. You have 60 days to file a claim. Typically, in my experience, I've had to do a couple of these. PayPal and eBay says typically 30 days. If you haven't received something there, that's the time to file a claim. And a couple of things will happen. They'll contact the seller and ask the seller to provide proof that the item was delivered. If the seller cannot do that or does not respond, typically you will get a refund of the purchase price. If the item at some point does arrive, you might be required to send the item back at the seller's expense depending on the resolution of the claim. So item is wrong item or different from the description. One time I bought an iPhone 3GS and got an iPhone 3G. Well, that's not what I ordered. Emailed the seller. Seller understood they made an error, refunded. Said, junk it, whatever. If you have to file a claim, make sure that what you have is different than what's in the description. So if you ask for an iPhone 4S and you clearly have an iPhone 4 and the description clearly says iPhone 4S and the seller is unresponsive, because the first step is to contact the seller. Do not immediately go file a dispute. Contact the seller first. eBay and PayPal both want to see buyer-seller communication before they intervene in a dispute. It's the seller or buyer's responsibility to first fix the problem. If they won't fix it, then eBay or PayPal will try to fix it for them. But ultimately, they want the seller or buyer to fix the problem. So you file that claim, and then the seller is given the opportunity to respond. All right, item is damaged upon arrival. This one's kind of tricky because technically, if the item is damaged in shipping and you didn't buy insurance, it's technically not the seller's fault. The seller isn't responsible for what happens at UPS, FedEx, the Postal Service, if you don't have insurance. So depending on the item, you might want to make sure, if it's a fragile item, that the seller has placed insurance on that item, so if something does happen, the seller can get some sort of monetary value back to refund to you, or somehow be able to replace the item. So, on the flip side now, you're the seller, and the buyer says, you sent me a damaged item. Require the buyer to provide pictures and proof the item was actually damaged. If your description lists the damage that they're complaining about, you have nothing to worry about. Sir, ma'am, my description clearly said that phone had a cracked screen or a scratch, or my description clearly said the phone will not turn on, the home button is broken, the power button doesn't work, whatever the case may be. Do not ever refund money until you have the damaged item back in your hands. I know the urge to make the buyer in this case happy, and it's the right intention, but don't let someone take advantage of you. Until you have the item back, do not refund money. It's up to you whether you provide the return shipping or they do. That's your call. If you are providing great customer service, typically you'll pick up that tab, but it depends. Now, if you'd bought insurance, you might want to make a claim with the shipping company if you realize the damage happened outside of your hands. For example, the box shows up at the seller's house crushed, or the buyer's house crushed. Well, you probably didn't intentionally crush the box before you sent it to the buyer, so that might be a conversation to have with the shipping company. My recommendation here is always insure the items for their full value that you're sending in case things happen. Humans are handling packages. They can drop things. They can run over them, whatever. Things do happen. Refunds. So the buyer says, I don't want it. It's your choice whether to offer refunds or not. eBay does not require you, just like in a brick and mortar shop, does not require you. You could say all sales are final. End of discussion. If you do offer refunds, it will increase sales, but it can invite problems, people trying to take advantage. I always recommend charging a fee for refunds unless there's another problem with the item. Now, if the item shows up and it's defective, you're selling new items, in-box items, they get it, it's defective. That's one thing. That's probably a case where even if you don't offer refunds, you would let them exchange the item. You might offer a refund, but at least an exchange. But it's up to you whether you want to offer a refund or just, I don't want it, I changed my mind. If you do, I would charge a restocking fee. A, they're paying shipping for it to come back, and B, you're charging a restocking fee to compensate you for the final value fee you paid. and your time. You spent time shipping that item. You spent time packaging that item. You should be compensated for that if the buyer changes their mind. And the 10% fee that you paid, if the buyer changes their mind, they should pay that fee. I typically charge 15 or 20%, depending on the item, if the buyer changes their mind. There are some exceptions, of course, but typically it's straight, I decided I didn't want it. After they've paid, that's typically how I handle it. Now, going back to the bidding's closed, I don't want it. You remind them that by bidding, they entered a legally binding contract, and you can force them to pay. And force, you can file a claim. You can actually sue them in small claims court if you really wanted to take it to the extreme, because you did have a binding contract. So the action you take there is up to you. So last, we have unhappy customers and negative feedback. If someone gives you negative feedback, resist the urge to respond with negative feedback back to them out of emotion. Never make decisions in business from emotion. You typically will lose when you do that. Take it as a chance to improve. Create dialogue with the buyer on why the buyer is unhappy. See if you can make it right by attempting to fix the situation. Also realize the more business you do, the more likely you are to encounter a customer that's just not going to be happy no matter what you do. They're going to leave negative feedback. You've had 100,000 sales and one person left negative feedback. It's a minuscule percentage. Cut your losses and move on. You're not going to be able to make everybody happy. But by following the steps in this course, especially the steps in the last lesson and if you're a seller, you will have a positive experience with most customers.